This video is optimized to help you sleep or relax. There's no sound effects, just the sound of rain through to the end. If you're planning on falling asleep, please like the video now and say hi in the comments. Your support is really appreciated. Remember to lock your door and get yourself a glass of water. Thanks for watching. I work for a well-known university as a field biologist and have recently been contracted out to the National Forest Service. My first assignment has been in the Potomac district of the Monongahela National Forest. Basically, I receive GPS coordinates and I either drive or hike to the designated spot and do what they want. This could be setting up trail cameras or counters, monitoring equipment, trail surveys and the like, and then recording the data 24 hours after placement. No big deal. I thought it odd that they specifically requested I place the cameras only 3 feet off the ground and some of the infrared cameras in the trees at specified heights. Some of these locations are on designated trails, but some are way off the trail in places that humans would never go. Sometimes, there isn't a hotel or lodging close enough. These are the remote mountains in West Virginia, and the Forest Service has outfitted me in some pretty dank camping gear on the occasions I might have to camp. I am an experienced hiker and camper and have spent many nights alone out in the field due to my career choice. I am a woman, about 5 feet 6 inches and 130 pounds, but not really afraid of anything. Again, the Forest Service has outfitted me well and I wear an emergency beacon that will send every law enforcement officer in the area to my location in no time. So I have been assigned to this district for a few months now and have really enjoyed my work. West Virginia is very remote and unspoiled, and that's why I enjoy my work. I get to see things most people would never see in their lives, and I have had so many positive and almost spiritual moments up until a few nights ago. I was working up near Spruce Knob, which is the highest point in West Virginia. It's essentially a complex system of trails, wilderness areas, camping, that kind of thing. It has also been snowing with howling winds and ice storms. I was camping up there to complete my work, and while the conditions were rough, I was almost enjoying it. My first night in the woods was pretty peaceful. I made dinner, set up camp and drank some whiskey and smoked some really good bud. I snuggled down in my sleeping bag and slept like a rock. It was very cold, but I wear this turtle fur face mask thing and didn't feel the cold too much. I woke up at dawn and went about building my fire back up, and I was starting some coffee when I noticed all this churned up snow around my campsite. Not tracks, just churned up snow like someone or something had kicked it all around. Weird, but whatever. I had a 15-mile hike to set some cameras and didn't have time to really wonder about it. I set off on my hike, did what I had to do, and started back to camp. I never wear headphones or anything like that, because hearing is one of the most important senses in the wilderness. I want to be able to hear any animals, people, etc. before I see them. It was already past dark when I made it back to camp, and I was too tired to do anything except strip down to my base layer, get in my sleeping bag and pass out. Around 2 a.m., I woke up because I could hear people talking. People. I was about 30 miles up a gravel road that was locked with Forest Service gates and about 10 miles from where my truck was parked, and I could hear voices. I completely lost it. I have a firearm and I quietly retrieved it from my pack and got back in my sleeping bag and cocked it and waited. I was on high alert, all my senses going wild. Eventually the voices faded and I couldn't hear them anymore, but I never went back to sleep. At daylight, I emerged from my tent to more churned up snow and my 2 trail cameras hanging from a tree about 5 feet from my tent. These were cameras that I had placed 15 miles out from my campsite. I packed my stuff as fast as I could and practically ran back to my truck. Along the way, I saw a lot of footprints all around my site, and when I reached my truck, I discovered it had been broken into and my computer and other equipment had been stolen. I am currently in a luxury log cabin at some resort, too scared to retrieve my other equipment and too embarrassed to tell my superiors how scared I am. The Forest Service brought me a new truck while my other one is getting the window replaced, and I did make a report about the theft, but there is absolutely no way that I'm ever going back to that site. I don't know if this means I will be fired or sent to work a desk, but out of all the years I have been doing this in national forests around the country, this is the most terrified I have ever been. I am not scared of the animals, and I have many stories to share about my encounters with them. I am scared of the people. I'm a wilderness survival instructor and security contractor. A couple of days ago, a good friend of mine, who is also one of my students, informed me that his dad just acquired 150 acres of land in a secluded and mountainous part of my state. This is someone with whom I've explored the woods before. He's more than competent when it comes to wilderness survival. The property, largely unexplored except for 100 yards that his dad had used for his horses, who are currently roaming freely, seemed intriguing. According to my friend, his dad got an incredible deal on the land. Given my friend, now a father of 3, doesn't get out into the woods often, I agreed to join him for what seemed like a fun outing and much-needed break. We share interests in our indigenous roots, cars, wilderness survival, and various other activities, ensuring lively conversations while in the woods. However, his dad cautioned us against exploring the woods without a gun, citing the presence of coyotes. But being natives of this area, we know coyotes rarely pose a threat to people. Additionally, my friend, whom we'll call DJ, previously mentioned seeing human-sized movement in the tree lines during his earlier visits to the property. Yet, due to his poor eyesight, he couldn't confirm what he had seen. For our exploration, I brought along my AR and a small flint napping kit, mainly for amusement. And off we went onto the property. Initially, we hiked across fields and creeks, multiple natural springs, and ponds, everything appearing normal and showcasing a beautiful landscape. But as we ventured into the unexplored forested section, the atmosphere changed dramatically. The forest exuded an eerie ambience reminiscent of the woods in the movie The Ritual. Gray and ominously quiet, except for the occasional creaking of the tall cedar trees. It felt like we were being observed from every angle. The air carried a putrid stench, akin to rotting flesh. Intrigued, we followed the smell and stumbled upon the remains of 3 to 4 cows. I took a video of them to show them to anyone who might know what could have done this. Examining the exposed skulls revealed no evidence of bullet wounds. Something had killed them, scattering their bones over a 30-yard area. Large and vague footprints surrounded the remains. Pressing deeper into the woods, accompanied only by silence, the smell of death, and the sound of our own heartbeats, we noticed various tracks along the stream. There were large coyote prints and something else, also large, intentionally avoiding the sand. Continuing, we encountered trees bent over and pinned behind others while still alive. An occurrence impossible in nature. Further along, we discovered what resembled a primitive tool made of bone, possibly a scooping tool or knife. It disturbed us because although rudimentary, it appeared more primitive than anything a human would make, yet clearly shaped intentionally. Our hike led us to a clearing with a pond encircled by large circular tracks. On the opposite side of the pond stood a peculiar little tree structure, an A-frame with rocks propped against it. However, it lacked stability, and the arrangement of rocks seemed oddly deliberate. Notably, there were no signs of campfires or camping debris nearby. This wasn't a location easily accessible from a house. I extensively photographed and filmed this strange hut-like structure. As dusk approached, we decided it was time to head back. I had a flashlight attached to my AR, but relying on that in the dark, when there's something out there capable of killing cows and making tools out of their bones, didn't seem wise. We retraced our steps out of the forest, reaching our trucks just before it became too dark. While leaving, we noticed an unidentified figure atop one of the hills, but chose not to investigate further. It's worth mentioning that the previous owner commenced construction on the property, abruptly stopped, and vacated the premises. We're planning on going back there again this weekend, but this time with a few more people and all of our camping gear. This happened about 10 years ago, in August 2013. I was camping in far north Queensland, Australia, in a place called Barron Falls. I'm a 21-year-old girl, and I was camping with my two male friends who were backpacking from Estonia, Theo and Charlie. Where we set up camp was not an official campsite. Instead, we walked along the tourist path, climbed over a railing, followed a train track for a few kilometers, and eventually veered off into the dense forest, downhill to the river. It certainly wasn't easy to get to this area, and there wasn't any mobile phone service, but Theo knew about it from friends who had shown it to him previously. The sight was beautiful. We were surrounded by a tropical forest and were only a short walk upstream from the waterfall. After setting up camp, we walked to the waterfall where both Theo and Charlie plunged from the cliff into the water below. I decided not to follow. I was, and still am, scared of heights and the possibility of hurting myself. I sat and watched them for a while before eventually deciding to return to camp and read my book. I was totally relaxed, enjoying the serenity, taking in the beauty around me. What had been an exciting, adventurous day was then interrupted by a deep, sinister laughter coming from the forest surrounding our campsite. Instantly alerted, I felt chills run through my body as I scanned the forest trying to detect where the laughter had come from. There was nothing. I tried to forget about it, convincing myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. Theo and Charlie returned and told me that they had forgotten fire lighters for the campfire. They said that they need to travel to the nearest store to buy some and that I should wait at camp. I told them that I didn't feel comfortable staying at camp, but didn't mention the laughter I'd heard before. I didn't want them to think I was stupid, and for context, at the time I had quite a large crush on Charlie. Stupidly, I wanted him to think I was cool. They told me it would be fine, that they would be back before dark. Reluctantly, I agreed and they made their way to the store. It was about 4 p.m. and I continued reading my book. I began to think about it, and I realized that the walk back to the car was about 20 to 30 minutes, so they would be gone for well over an hour. At this time of year, dusk would be at 5:30 p.m. or so, and I would therefore likely be alone in this remote area in the dark. I distracted myself with my book, but as dusk began to settle, I struggled to read the pages, and fear began to set in. After about an hour, I started to hear footsteps in the forest. My first thought was that Theo and Charlie had returned, and I was instantly relieved that I was no longer alone. I listened for their voices, but heard nothing. My heart dropped. It dawned on me that it may be someone else, and I started panicking. Then came the laughter. The same deep, sinister laughter I'd heard before, only this time it seemed much closer. I sprung to my feet and surveyed the forest. That's when I saw him. He was standing on the other side of a stream, which was connected to the river. Standing on a log, what I saw was absolutely bizarre. He was wearing an immaculate tuxedo, with a top hat and all. I remember being puzzled as to how he was able to get to this area in such clean, formal clothes, and I at first thought he may be an apparition or that I was hallucinating. I did a double take, and I was not. I then studied the man's face. It is hard to describe, but it looked like his face was burnt, like Dwight from The Walking Dead, and he had deep scarring covering his face. His hair was shoulder length, very wiry, and unkempt. He laughed, that same laugh I'd heard from the forest. Miraculously, I heard my friends' voices approaching. The man seemed alarmed, and said that he saw somebody else camping upstream, and that he is going to check on them. He left, and minutes later, Theo and Charlie returned. I immediately told them what happened, and they laughed and thought I was making it up, that it was a lame attempt to scare them. Tears began to gather in my eyes, and Charlie realized that I was serious. Theo didn't seem fazed. He was a very stereotypical backpacker and had the carefree nature travelers tend to have. Charlie, however, assured me that I would be okay and had me sleep between him and Theo for the next 2 nights. I barely slept at all for those nights. I kept listening for the laughter, but fortunately never heard it again. For years after, I searched online for any reports of similar encounters. I never found anything, but I have always contemplated what would have happened if Theo and Charlie hadn't returned at that moment. I shudder at the thought. I grew up in these woods and usually feel comfortable there. However, I stumbled into a few unsettling situations that would stick in my mind forever. This was one such occasion. I was 18 at the time. One evening, my two friends, Mike and Paul, and I decided to go camping. Well, camping might not be the right word since we didn't plan to spend the night, just chill and have some fun around the campfire for a while. The plan was simple: head out, build a campfire, drink a few bottles of wine, eat something, and head back home for a good night's sleep. We met at my house while it was still sunny outside, got ready, and headed out. Our destination was an old abandoned quarry in the middle of the woods, about 40 minutes from my house. Even though the quarry had a tragic and frankly creepy history, it was a popular place for such occasions. When we got there, the sky was already reddish as the sun slowly sank behind the hills. We quickly gathered all the firewood we could find so we wouldn't have to look for it later. As darkness fell and everything around us turned into impenetrable blackness, we managed to get the fire going. We were in a great mood and were getting ready for our first toast. That's when we realized we made a horrible mistake. We forgot the corkscrew. We attempted to open the wine without it, but quickly gave up. The bottles were quite expensive, and we didn't want to damage them. At this point, it was clear that one of us would have to jog back to retrieve the corkscrew. After some discussion, I volunteered with two conditions. Firstly, they would give me a hatchet in case something went wrong along the way. Secondly, no pranks when I got back. Mike and Paul agreed without hesitation. They handed me a hatchet and a flashlight and sent me on my way. As I jogged through the forest, I heard a noise resembling a boar. Suddenly, I remembered a warning I received from an older hunter a few days ago. He said that at this time of year, boars were getting dangerous, especially at night. I was a bit nervous, but luckily managed to survive unharmed. I arrived safely back home, much to the surprise of my mom, who didn't expect me so early. I explained the situation. She just laughed. I grabbed the corkscrew and headed back. Not wanting to encounter a boar, I chose another slightly longer path, this time through an open field. After a while, I reached our spot. It was a small clearing surrounded on one side by massive rocks, maybe 70 meters tall, and on the other side by a thick forest. Our campfire was in the middle of the clearing. When I approached it, I realized that there wasn't anybody around, although our backpacks were still on the ground and the fire was burning brightly. Great. We specifically agreed that there would be no pranks when I got back. Those guys think they're funny, I thought to myself. I resignedly sat down near the fire facing the woods. That's the only place where they could have hidden, I thought. I was really tired, and all I could think about was the taste of that exquisite Pinot that we brought with us. I wasn't in the mood for their games, and I was getting quite mad. That's when I heard the snapping of twigs and rustling of leaves from the edge of the forest, maybe 30 meters from where I was sitting. The sound was rhythmic and undoubtedly the sound of somebody walking. I aimed my flashlight in that direction and spotted a tall person wearing a dark hoodie. As I shined my flashlight on him, he stopped walking, turned towards me, and just kept staring motionlessly. Even though he was facing me directly, I couldn't see his face. I shouted, "Paul, you fat jerk. I know you're trying to scare me." We agreed on something, so stop messing around and come out. As I finished, the hooded figure turned and walked deeper into the woods. At that moment, my phone started ringing. I hurriedly took it out of my pocket. It was Mike. I took the call and started barking at him, "Really funny, you guys. I thought we agreed on something. What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about you trying to mess with me. I clearly saw you, so you can come out." Mike seemed frozen for a minute. For what felt like an eternity, All I could hear was his heavy breathing and Paul mumbling something in the background. When he finally snapped back to reality, he said, "Dude, we're at your house." We heard some footsteps. At first, we thought it was you messing with us. But then we got scared and decided to look for you. I forgot my phone at your house, so we couldn't even call you. Just get out of there, and we'll come back for our stuff together. Nonsense. That's just another of your stupid pranks, and I'm not buying it. Hold on a second. There was some incoherent mumbling for a while. Hey, what's going on? My mom's voice suddenly came from the phone. My head spun, and my heart skipped a beat as I realized they weren't kidding. Suddenly, a wave of fear ran through my body. However, I managed to convince my mom that everything was fine and that she shouldn't worry. She gave the phone back to Mike. "Just leave everything and come back. We're heading over right now. We'll meet you halfway there. I'm not going anywhere alone again. You better get here quick. I'm waiting for you." I hung up. I didn't want to make any more noise than I already did. I quickly turned off my flashlight and backed off from the light of the fire. I moved all the way to the huge wall of rocks, figuring that if I had my back covered, it would eliminate one possible approach for the unwanted visitor. I stood there in complete darkness, trying not to make a sound while tightly clutching my hatchet, which would be my best friend for the next half an hour. I had to convince myself not to curl into a ball in fear. Even my own body started to betray me as my hearing worsened due to my wildly beating heart. I tried to calm myself, but in the worst-case scenario, every bit of adrenaline would help. After what seemed like an eternity, I spotted 2 weak light beams coming from the forest. I heard Paul shout my name. I'd never been so relieved. I finally ran out of my hiding spot to greet my friends. For quite some time, we just stood there, laughing from relief. We even got a bit cocky and considered staying. After all, there was just one, supposedly, creep lurking between the trees, and there were 3 of us. Funny. Minutes earlier, I was terrified, and suddenly I was full of tough bravado, thinking, what could possibly happen? In the end, good judgment prevailed, and we decided to leave. We packed our things, extinguished the fire, and left. We took our wine bottles to enjoy somewhere else. Somewhere well-lit and safe. I've held this story in for the last 6 years because it sounds crazy, and I got told not to talk about it. I went camping 6 years ago with a now ex-boyfriend. The campsite we picked was beautiful. We were able to drive in through some rough trails. The spot we picked was next to some hiking trails that weren't very far from some natural hot springs and a huge waterfall. We were in the middle of nowhere, absolutely no one was around. We set up camp next to the car, went hiking, soaked in the hot springs, came back, and had dinner. It was all very normal. Until we woke up the next day. I need to give some context as to how we slept that night so you can understand my confusion. Before we went to sleep, I put our food cooler in a stereo that we brought in the car and locked it. I put the keys in the front pocket of my backpack and placed the backpack next to my sleeping bag on the far side of the tent, away from the door of the tent. My boyfriend at the time slept nearest the door of the tent with a gun next to him. When we woke up the next morning, I felt fine. I had slept hard, and from inside the tent, everything seemed normal. When we got out, our campsite was absolute chaos. The fire pit we had made was ruined. The cooler had been thrown, and food was scattered all over the place. The stereo was smashed to pieces, lying next to a tree. All of the car doors were open, including the trunk. We stood there for a minute in silence, just taking everything in. The woods felt strange, it was quiet and not the beautiful campsite that I saw yesterday. Everything about those woods felt wrong. My ex accused me of not locking the car and said that an animal got into our stuff. I promised that I had locked it and went into the tent to grab the keys from my backpack, but they weren't there. I found them later on the ground right next to the car. We quickly threw everything in the trunk and left. My boyfriend was quiet and wouldn't talk to me about what had just happened. He finally spoke up when we were almost home and told me that he had a dream about something kneeling over him in the tent, holding his gun, and just staring at him. When I tried to ask him more questions, he got quiet again and said he didn't want to talk about it and that I shouldn't talk about it anymore either. I've tried to forget about it, but I just can't. Something really wrong happened to us in the woods that night.